Hello and welcome everyone to here at the Tsunami Conference Center and also on Zoom to this presentation, emergency preparedness readiness presentation of tsunamis, questions and answers all about tsunamis. And I'd like to welcome Brett Higman of Ground Crew Alaska. Hey Brett, Elena Tsunami and
Hi.
and I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing your names correctly.
That's fine.
From the UAF Geophysical Institute, and Mark Ball from Tsunami Village Tribe Emergency Manager. Welcome, and they're going to talk about tsunamis and answer any of our questions. So, welcome.
I think we have a few other experts on the line too. Dmitry Nikolsky, Barrett Salisbury, and Michael West, I think, are all also on the line.
Okay, I did get Dmitry. I didn't get the other, so yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
Elena and Dmitry. Okay, welcome and thank you for presenting tonight. And if you need us to speak up, just let us know when we ask questions. And
maybe we can go around the meeting and do some small introductory for people who are on Zoom. So it would be useful, I think. And
yes, please, thank you.
And who is going to, because everyone can see a different list of people, so it would be better that one person names people and then we just do some introductory.
So, would you please introduce yourself then?
I'm Dmitry Nikolsky. I'm from University of Alaska, Fairbanks. And here at the university, we are studying tsunamis and produce tsunami inundation maps for the state, for different communities, starting from Aleutian Islands, from Unalaska, Sandpoint, Kodiak, and for the southwest and also for the southeast communities.
Great, thank you. Elena, could you please introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Elena Suleimani. I work with Dmitry at the Geophysical Institute on tsunami maps for coastal Alaska. So we've been in Sildovia at least 3 times, I think, with presentations on the Sildovia tsunami hazards and presenting the reports and the maps. And I'm glad we have such a great connection to the community, so we can use that to present even more useful information for you. Thanks.
Thank you, great. And then Brett.
Sure. So I'm Brett Higman. I often go by Hig. A lot of people who know me as much more through my mom than anyone else call me Brett. So I have different names and different contexts that all crossing paths here. I guess my expert background is in tsunami impacts and the effects of tsunamis on shore. And I've done a number of post-tsunami surveys, and more recently have been involved in landslide generated tsunamis. And I live in Sildovia.
How convenient.
Yes.
And I didn't get the name of there's somebody on the telephone, is that correct?
I was thinking, I think Michael West is here. Mike West, if it's the Mike West I'm thinking of anyway.
I'll turn my video on for a moment. Yeah, I'm Mike West. Nice to join all of you. I'm at UAF. I direct the Alaska Earthquake Center. I coordinate very closely with Elena Suleimani, Dmitry Nikolsky. I am not on the nuts and bolts computational side that they are, but reflect more of an outreach and public engagement side of this.
Wonderful, thank you. And I believe Mark Ball is the ask one. I hope I'm not omitting anyone else.
Yeah, hopefully we're not omitting anybody, and if you are, please speak up. I'm Mark Ball. I'm the tribe's emergency manager. I have over 20 years of experience in emergency management and degree in emergency management as well. And I've been the tribe's emergency manager officially since April. So I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. Good to have you. Does anyone want to start out asking questions, or do we want to just ask one of Brett or Elena or any of you to just start talking? Who has a question?
I invited James and to this meeting, and he is a state Alaska Tsunami Program Manager, and probably James can introduce himself.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Dimitri. This is James Benchwall. I work for the State of Alaska Emergency Management Agency, and just moved into, if you guys knew Dan Belanger, worked with him on anything, I just moved into his role in the last couple months here. Been a little weird in the middle of COVID, so still getting used to what exactly I'm doing, but looking forward to working with all of you, and yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Thank you and welcome. Welcome to all of you. I know that you were given some questions, I believe, to Brett. If you want to start by presenting those questions and giving some answers, unless you have another talk you want to give about tsunamis. Whoever wants to speak up, please.
I think a lot of the questions that came out, I'm actually just trying to pull them up here, are really, I'm not necessarily the best one to answer them, but maybe I can provide a little bit of, I can ask the question along with a little context and just pass it off to, it's great that we have James here too, some of the folks who are directly dealing with these. So there were several questions that I think actually fall pretty closely into what Elena and Dimitri and the National Tsunami Hazard Mitigation Program, what they are involved in around inundation zones. So asking about what an inundation zone is, how do you know if you're in an inundation zone, and then there's a question, how is it figured out as to which level of the inundation zone I'm in? So presumably that's some level of risk that's associated with that. So maybe I'll just throw out that trio of questions that are all pretty closely related and see if maybe Dimitri and Elena or others want to respond.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Let's start with Dmitri.
Okay. We can rotate. All of us are
Sure.
experts here. And,
Of course.
but I'll take a step. What is a inundation zone? Inundation zone is an area flooded by a tsunami during the earthquake, and we know that there are lots of different earthquakes. It could be, and that earthquake can make a small tsunami, and this earthquake can make a large tsunami. And inundation zone, it's a zone which could be flooded by the earthquake. It could be tectonic earthquake by displacement of water. It could be also an earthquake due to the landslide, which happens underwater and can also produce the wave. So it's both of them.
One thing that I just add in there from the experience of being in areas that were impacted by tsunamis is, you know, although the model of course has uncertainty, you don't necessarily know exactly where the tsunami reaches. But when you're looking at a literal inundation zone, the area that wasn't inundated by a tsunami, in the case of large tsunamis especially, it's a very dramatic line. You go from where they're above this line, there are essentially no impacts, and then sometimes only 5 or 10 feet of elevation below that line, it might be strong enough flows to flatten forests and stuff. So there's one thing about, you know, if you are in the position of trying to flee a tsunami, getting far enough really does completely protect you. It's really like getting high enough or far enough inland. That's the goal. It's, you know, there's certainly complexities you could roll on top of that, but it's a pretty sharp line in reality.
May I
Yes.
add something?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think we need to kind of talk about two different kind of inundation zone. One which actually happened in an actual tsunami, right? Like Higgs said, if he goes to a tsunami, post-tsunami survey, let's say to Indonesia, right? Then inundation zone, it's actually inundated during that recent tsunami, right? Then we have also inundation zone that we put on our maps that we calculate, right? And in this case, this inundation zone, it's the zone that hasn't happened yet. It might happen in the future. The question is, how do we make that? How do we predict that the next worst case event will go up to that line? And this is a different kind of inundation zone. This is what we use we use the kind of the best available science that we have today, right? To estimate the worst case scenario that can happen in this community, given what we know about the subduction zone, given that what we know about geology. So we use all available kind of scientific information and we calculate that wave and we say, okay, this is going to be the line. But again, you know, Brett said that we have uncertainties, we have like, models are not exact, models have, you know, uncertainties. So that's why it's only a kind of a guidance for you to create your evacuation plan. So you see the line and you think, okay, where can we put the assembly points? Where can we put the shelters? Based on that kind of, based on our computer estimate. So.
I have a question and anybody can answer it. I'm Rick Hartman from Seldovia. And the question I have, is there any kind of buoys or detection stations in the ocean on the coast of Alaska that can detect a tsunami?
So who wants to answer?
Well, there are. I wonder if maybe James wants to jump in with this one.
Yeah, can you repeat that question? It was a little bit, there's a little bit of an echo.
He was asking about the whether there were buoys that detect tsunamis.
Whether there are buoys that what now? I'm sorry.
That for detecting tsunamis.
Oh, gotcha. I do not know the answer to that, but
Yeah,
I'm happy to reach back and try to get something for you guys for sure. Does anyone else have information on that?
Can I share a screen? How do I share a screen? Yeah, I see how. Okay.
You do it. Yeah.
The second one, two. I want desktop one. Okay. So it's just loading up. Just wait a minute. So we have that map here, which is Gulf of Alaska, and I'm going to show you where those buoys are. Let me see. Okay, so now you can see a little bit better. Let's zoom. So can you see those red marks? So these are the underwater buoys that detect tsunamis using the bottom pressure recorders. And you can see, let's turn on the satellite imagery. So here we are in Seldovia, right? And these are the buoys. So yes, they will detect tsunamis, but imagine that tsunami is happening right here or tsunami is happening right here. Most probably the wave will come to Ketchimak Bay before it gets to the buoy, which means that we cannot count on the buoys. We cannot count on the buoys to tell us if we need to evacuate or if we don't need to evacuate, because the answer is you need to evacuate if a tsunami warning is issued, right? Then to cancel the tsunami warning, for example, they get information from those buoys that show them that the wave is very small, and then they can cancel the warning. But they should never be used to decide about evacuation. Because in our case, we are so close to potential tsunami sources in the Gulf of Alaska that we can't wait for that wave to reach the buoy. You need to act much sooner than that. And this is the major.
And Yelena, I can add to that, and you can show the earthquake model here. For
okay, of course.
Yeah,
let's look at the Homer. Yeah.
And I can add that there are also buoys at the communities. For example, there is a buoy in a Kodiak. There is a buoy at Valdez and Seward, and those tide gauges can also detect tsunamis. And but as Elena said, in the very beginning of this ground shaking, we don't know exactly what type of the earthquake is occurring. But earthquake is occurring right next to our homes, and it takes time for the wave to get from this colorful patch to this marker in the open ocean. It takes about half an hour to detect, just to get the first reading. And by this time, the wave is already getting on land, and people, there is just too much risk to be near shore and see what the wave is going to register at the dark. People should go to the higher ground if the shaking is strong enough, and then from this safety applications, they can look at what dark buoy is doing and look for whatever information they want.
I'm wondering what how does that apply with we'll call it maybe like a tele-tsunami, but a tsunami that's far enough away that you don't feel shaking. So like in the cases that you're showing here, these would all produce quite strong shaking.
Exactly.
Here in Seldovia. Yeah. And so I think, you know, that provides, in some ways that's, you know, that's your warning. If you feel strong shaking that lasts for a long time, regardless of whether the sirens are going off, it's a good idea to evacuate. But with this recent earthquake that we had out near the Shumagans, I know some people in Cook Inlet did feel it, but I didn't feel it here, and I think not many people felt it in Seldovia. And the small tsunami that was generated it passed a number of buoys long before it would have reached Seldovia. So anyway, that's a little more complicated case. I'm wondering if you could speak to that.
Can I jump in on that too, Brett, before they do?
Sure.
Yeah, just note, so especially if there's folks who are watching who maybe living in this area is new for them, or they're just not as familiar. So we do have the tsunami warning system, so Seldovia's experience with that recent earthquake was that the warnings went off, but knowing that it spread out quite a bit, not everybody heard it. It was in the evening. Many people are sleeping, they didn't hear it. The wind was blowing in such a way that some people heard it and others didn't. So there was that. Then some people were learning about it on social media. Some people learned about it because law enforcement drove around and announced it. And yeah, in all of that, we're wanting people to be knowledgeable about the choices that they make. So the reason we want them to know about inundation zones is so that they know where they are and where safety would be if needed. And so as Seldovia Village Tribe, we're trying to help people develop that awareness. You know, where is their home? Where are their friends at? You know, to make sure that those folks come. So it's a really bigger look at the preparedness for the community as a whole, and knowing that we extend from Seldovia Bay all the way to Jacklauf Bay, and we have people at all elevations of, you know, quite a bit of different elevations in regards to whether or not they would be in the inundation zone. So I think that context hopefully will help as we go in our conversation. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, Elena, I wonder if that would be a good lead into showing, you know, reviewing the actual tsunami maps for Seldovia.
So we have here, let me just type it. It's tsunami.alaska.edu. It's easy to remember. You go here and you see the map of Alaska and all the communities on the right-hand side. So can you see the whole screen? Okay, so let's look what we have for Seldovia. So when you click on the community, the map automatically zooms to the community and you can see that red inundation line. Then you can click on the water depth box and you can see that the colored area is the area that will be flooded. So you can do many things with this map. You can zoom in, you can explore, you can print out that particular view, and you can go and click on the publication link and you will find the most recent report for Homer and Seldovia that was published. You can download all the maps in PDF. You can find the report, text of the report in PDF. So basically all information is here. And the best thing about that it works on a cell phone. So this interface is mobile optimized. It's very convenient. So anyone can get it on the phone. It's tsunami.alaska.edu. So do we have any questions about this particular map?
We have a question here from Darlene. I don't know if it's in regards to this particular map, but
it's regards to inundation. Brett, you know where we live, just down the hill from you. We're at 400 feet elevation, and I always felt that we were safe there, 3 miles from town and 400 feet high. What do you think?
I think that's fair. I mean, not that there are no cases of a tsunami reaching that elevation, but those cases are pretty much exclusively areas that are directly across from a major landslide, which isn't something that we face here. So I think it's really that, yes, you're safe from tsunami there.
Okay, thank you.
And I can add is that ground shaking. It's just going back to that how.
I don't know. You don't know that one?
If the earthquake is happening right next to us, we can feel the ground shaking. And if the ground shaking is 20 seconds or longer, this is a prime sign to evacuate. But I heard of that the sirens didn't work, and these sirens are rated only for the outdoor purposes. This is hard to hear them inside if you're right next to the siren, and there are different messages distributed by the warning center. So people can sign up for the text messages on a cell phone, and they can sign up to the Twitter. And in this case, they will receive a tsunami warning or alert about the earthquake and when it might be, when the first wave is coming, and etc. And the state was working last year to do reverse 911 calls, that everyone who is in the warning zone, in the tsunami warning zone, should receive a text message. And I hope many of you received the text message. Is it true?
We did.
I got a phone call.
Phone call.
So This is Shannon. I'm going to come and just speak to that. I didn't receive any text messages, and I do not have a landline. I only have a cell phone. So I'm wondering how they determine your location. I mean, obviously my address is connected to my cell phone, but here we use PO boxes. We don't use street addresses as readily. So it's not necessarily on my cell phone contract. I'm not even sure what's on that. So I'm not sure how they would connect me other than just Seldovia and zip code.
You have
I can
to
take a
sign
stab
up
at.
for it to get it on your.
Well, and
Yeah.
I did hear that from people after the fact that it's something that you have to sign up for, but you were speaking to
Yeah.
reverse 911, which is a different thing.
Yeah, there are two different ways, and
Yeah.
Okay.
I can speak to that. So with the way that the Tsunami Warning Center works is they work off the wireless emergency alerts system, and you don't need to sign up for that. That's automatically set up with the cell phone companies, and what they use is kind of what's known as a geofencing. They mark out an area where they feel is going to be within the threat area, and then they send out an alert that goes to the cell towers in that fenced area, which then transmits to the cell phones within that area. And it doesn't matter what the carrier is. Now, if you didn't receive that message, there may have been a miss as far as your connectivity to the cell tower. I know that I received them in Anchor Point for that, and because they hit the entire area up this way. Now, I did also receive a phone call, and that was because I signed up for the KPB alerts, and it's a system called Code Red, or it's something you can sign up for. It'll come across your phone as Code Red, and it's an automated message that is put together by the borough, and that's separate to it. So I received a text message from the wireless emergency alert system, and then I also received the phone call from the borough through Code Red that you can sign up for.
Thank you, Mark.
You're welcome.
Hey Mark, strangely enough, I actually live in Anchorage and I work in Prudhoe Bay, but I was in Prudhoe Bay and I got the alert on my phone. I'm not sure how that works because I don't even live in Seldovia, but.
Yeah, that is strange. That is strange that happened. I know that it went to areas that it shouldn't have gone to. Like they were saying the alert should not have gone to Homer and Seldovia and Anchor Point, but it did. But again, they kind of draw a quick map, and it's not based on your billing address or your area code. It's based on where you are physically at that moment. So yeah, that is strange that you received that.
Yeah. Does the capability exist to send out, kind of like advertising goes out when it's somebody drives into a certain area and they're gonna get an ad that hits them? Do we have that capability on the Southern Kenai Peninsula to hit people? Because we found that folks on the Homer Spit were without information, even though the sirens went on.
Right, and that's the system called geofencing, and I have suggested that to the city of Homer to see about getting for the especially for the Spit, because we do have a lot of tourists that come in and they hear the sirens going off and they don't necessarily know what it means, or if it says evacuate, they don't know where to go. But it's a system, it will send a text message to everybody within that area with specific instructions. I'm hoping that they do develop that system for Homer, and it would be something good to think about for Seldovia as well.
So go ahead.
I did not get a text message, but my cell phone rang, John's cell phone rang, and the phone on the wall rang. So we got 3 calls.
Good.
So I wanted to mention, Elena was just, before we got into that other conversation there about that, Elena was sharing her screen, and I'm looking at the map, and every time I look at the map, I can see my house just on the edge of that line. If you look at the bottom of the map, there's 2, like a white structure and a structure right next to it. Yeah, that's my neighbor and I. And so we laugh about this because we're like right on the edge, but our house does set up high on a hill, and elevation wise, we feel like we're, you know, good. But Elena, you mentioned that this is a guideline. There's no, you know, there's no way that we can predict exactly to the foot where this water is going to stop and start, you know. So I want to just speak to that as far as the safety of being outside of the zone, but being barely outside of what is this guideline zone.
Hey, can I tackle this one? This is Mike West.
Sure, thanks.
You raise a really good point. And I think one of the things we're trying to convey this evening is that modeled inundation line, that red line that Elena is showing, reflects what we believe today to be what we might call a maximum credible scenario, right? We could very well have tsunamis, very well expect tsunamis that don't even come to this line, right? But we know, we have every reason to believe that there are plausible tsunami events in the future that could come up to what is shown on the line here. Now, I explain that because that's just, I hate to undermine what we do, but just our best estimate. There are a whole lot of assumptions. We're attempting to predict the future, let's be honest. I mean, we're talking about things that haven't happened, and there is a margin of error in that. So what we would love to see communities do is take that line. Here's what we think is plausible. And you know what, honestly, a couple of years from now, that might change because we learn something new about tsunami science or see something that catches our attention elsewhere in the world. What we encourage communities to do is take this line and then you decide, put some buffer zone on it, a safety buffer, a hazard buffer. You know, if that was my house, I would add a little buffer to that. I'd probably put my own, speaking off the record here, but I'd probably put my house, you know, in that zone. But I think it's really a community responsibility to say, what are we going to do with this information, and where are we going to draw our expectations for the community? And the key to that is this sort of this safety zone, or this buffer on what to account for the uncertainties in what we're providing.
Right. So my thought would be, and my statement to that would be, is that you don't want to build into people a false sense of security because I'm outside the line that I'm safe. You know, there's always a margin of error, as you mentioned, that, you know, this is a natural disaster for a reason. It's not 100% predictable, and every case scenario is not going to be the same.
This is something that Dmitry Nikolsky has really beat into my head over the last year or so, and I think with good reason. That's right. What we're looking at here on the screen is probably not the best choice of evacuation lines, if you will. That is a separate discussion that's really best had in the community.
One thing I would add for this specific case, and I think it feeds right into what Mike's saying, is so there are many different assumptions, right, that go into this inundation line. And in the case of Soldovia, the tsunami itself is an interesting discussion. A lot of that actually has to do with subsidence. So it's not just the wave we're talking about, there's subsidence involved. But there's also the topography, and this has been an issue in Soldovia, and you know, the Elena and has recently revised this based on topography, getting improved topographic information, improved information about what the shape of the land is that this tsunami is running over. And this is still not perfect. And if you were to spend some time, I can actually look at the little bit of the screen that's showing right now and see one piece that I'm pretty sure is incorrect. That's if you go straight west from Shannon's house there's a little peninsula. And
This one?
no, I'm actually zoomed. If you zoom back into where you were there, it's not just a little north. You're moving a little too fast for me. Go west from there. But there's a marsh anyway that's just above sea level, and this if you were to take this literally, it would say, oh, the wave doesn't go across there. Or if you go to Shannon's neighborhood, I'll say this for folks who really know Seldovia, Oliveira's house is actually quite low down. It's just northeast of the house that Shannon was pointing out earlier, and but it's shown as outside the inundation line, and that is probably because the topography is collected using radar, and it picked up the tops of the trees, and there are trees right around Oliveira's house. So the measurement thought there was a hill right there, but the hill doesn't actually exist and actually doesn't provide the protection that it might have. There is actually a new topography data set. Dimitri and I have discussed this some, that the Army Corps of Engineers collected that does a better job at this. It actually does penetrate the trees. It only covers Seldovia proper, but it would cover everything that Elena's been focusing on here. And so without changing any of the assumptions about the source, but rerunning that model with that improved topography, we would get an improved idea of what that scenario looks like. Okay. That doesn't eliminate the issue that Mike is bringing up. There still are uncertainties, and it's still a function of the specific scenarios that are considered. And I think, and maybe Dimitri and Elena, you could speak to how conservative you feel this worst case scenario is here. But
can I show you something in regards to those two houses that are at the edge? I think I have a very good illustration of what can happen. So you probably know that in Tohoku tsunami, many people died not because they were not prepared. Japan was the nation that was most prepared for tsunamis in the world, right? They have regular trainings, they know the warning signs, they all have, information on their phones about the tsunami. But the problem was that evacuation plans were inadequate. And on this map, for example, you see that the red line was the calculated inundation kind of worst case scenario line for that city. And the blue line is how far away in 2011. So based on the best available science, they made the red line, calculated everything, and what happened, they didn't know that this kind of earthquake can happen, right? And so the wave went much further. And then look at this map. This is just a very similar map to what we've been looking at Seldovia, right? But this is actual inundation. This is what actually happened during that tsunami. And look at these tiny little dots. So this is the evacuation building. Before the tsunami, they thought it's a safety area, and they built that evacuation building there, right? So people knew exactly where to go. They were trained. When they've got a message about tsunamis, they started going to that building. Guess what? They died in that building. And just think about it. If you walk just a little bit higher uphill, so the building was at the foothill, right? If you just keep going, you don't stop at that building, you just keep going, you have time, right? They didn't. So it means that, like in this case, it doesn't mean that the water will stop here. Just keep going, right? Keep going until, it's off. So this is, I think, how it needs to be handled.
Let me continue. Yeah, thank you for showing the Tohoku and describing. Something happened to my. You show the importance of a safety buffer. This is what you're showing, and he, as you mentioned, We live in the world where we can always improve upon by incorporating new science and etc. and etc. What this red line is showing is this is a guideline or some sort of a rough estimate up to now. What we think the worst case might be, and we try to we try to include all science that we learned from a Tohoku earthquake, and we model these gigantic earthquakes as Tohoku here, and but still the science of the earthquake learned a lot in the last 20 years. There is huge progress that happened before, but the earthquakes still make surprises to us, and each earthquake is sometimes is a mystery how it can happen. Anyways, but we have some understanding what is happening on some level, and as Mike mentioned. And the safety buffer this is really important. And we traveled. We had for example, last fall in November I traveled to Cordova, and we had a community meeting with emergency managers in Cordova, and we looked at this red line in Cordova, and we walked the city, and mapped the evacuation zone, where the city and the signs can and the signs could be combined in a way to help people to be on the higher ground. So this is a red line for Cordova, but in the middle of this, but we moved, we moved this red line one block to the east, to this big road. To this road. We moved it just to be on the conservative side, and it follows, and the evacuation line is sort of following the road network, so it's easy for for tourists who visit the community. You can tell the tourists or visitors, then go to that street and beyond it, and this is might be the easiest solution.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's not that easy in Seldovia, I guess.
Yes, so each community is different. And this is what we learned a lot. And and it's necessary, I would say, because this red line is constructed on the ground measurements, how high the ground measurements based on some survey. And Brett suggested a better survey. We can run the model, but we are still not completely 100% sure of all the errors that could be related to the newer models. So that's why, but this safety buffer can incorporate this uncertainty, and it's in some sense.
Brett, this is Darlene again.
Yep.
And you mentioned subsidence, and I had forgotten about that, because I guess if we were having an earthquake with subsidence, that would ruin your line too, right? Because the ground would go down. And in the '64 quake, the earth was moving like we were on a boat, rocking back and forth and back and forth. And I realized later, that's probably when we were going down, was every time it was rocking back and forth, we must have been going lower. But so I guess if we were in an earthquake that was rocking like that, we should have second thoughts that maybe we're subsiding a bit. Would that be a good plan?
Well, I think a couple things. First of all, I think that the subsidence is built into the scenario here. Elena can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's actually a large part of what's going on here. Without the subsidence, it would look totally different. And I think that rocking motion, you may be right that in some way that, you're actually, as that was happening, that's when the land is going down. I don't know that they're directly linked one-to-one, but the thing that is, if you're getting down to the details there, you're talking about a quite long period. And you're feeling not only does it shake for a long time, but the sense of this motion that's quite long period. And that may well be associated with a very large earthquake, the sort that could produce a really destructive tsunami. So I think, all these signs, like if the earthquake lasts for a really long time, it has that really long period shaking. If it's shaking so hard that, the harder it's shaking, the worse it is. But, if it's shaking so hard, it's hard to stand up. Sometimes people say, all of these are signs that this is a serious event that, and duration is maybe the most useful one of all of those. But those are all signs that this is a very serious event.
Well, in '64, the earthquake here, it wasn't hard to stand up, but I was holding a cupboard door shut. My husband was holding the bird cage because it was swinging back and forth wildly, but we could still stand up because it was like we were on a boat on a little rough day. And it did last for a long time. And I've been in other earthquakes where they're bouncing you up and down and things like that. But '64 in Seldovia wasn't like that. I know in other places it was much worse, but it wasn't rough here. It was just rocky.
So what would cause that?
Perfect person to answer that.
What would cause that? Would it be a deep or a shallow earthquake that would cause that, and which is more dangerous?
Well, I think we can say a shallow earthquake is going to be more dangerous for tsunamis, pretty unequivocally. But I'm curious if Mike could speak up to like the difference in the experience of shaking that people have for different earthquakes.
Sure. I mean, the answer is fairly generic, but earthquakes come in all different shapes and sizes. The 1964 earthquake took several minutes just for the actual rupture to happen. And as a result, even in areas very close to the shaking, close to the hypocenter, whether you were in Prince William Sound or Anchorage, there was much more of a sort of a longer rolling motion. I mean, they were literally more like waves on the earth than, say, some of the earthquakes that you probably feel more routinely, that I assume in Seldovia feel a bit more like almost like someone grabs your shoulders and just gives you a little bit of shake. That's because the earthquakes are very different and last for a different amount of time and create different kinds of waves. The other thing is the distance. In 1964, that motion that you were feeling was probably actually very large seismic waves, but from pretty far away, kind of from all over. That rupture was, happening. You were getting waves from Kodiak, you were getting waves from the Prince William Sound area, and those are very different than the shakes that sort of come from your back door, if you will.
I was going to bring up a different kind of line of questioning that I'm seeing. There was a couple in the chat that came up, and these are questions about the propagation of a tsunami and what sorts of how fast the tsunami moves, how and what sorts of protection the sort of coastal geometry or that coastline might provide. And I just wanted to address part of that, but I think that others can provide a lot of detail there too. And that's the question of, are you safe if you're, like for a tsunami to get from the open ocean to Seldovia, it has to go around a number of corners. And I know when I was a kid, I remember my parents saying, like, I don't know, I think we're pretty safe because the tsunami has to go around the corners and waves don't do that real well. Well, that intuition is incorrect here. And the reason I think we developed that intuition based on short period wind waves that really lose a tremendous amount of energy as they're going into a harbor. But the word tsunami actually is a Japanese word, and it's literally translated as harbor wave. They were noted as being very, very destructive in protected harbors, and that's because they have a much longer period. there's the essentially incorrect term for a tsunami, that a tidal wave, and I think that where that comes from is because it behaves somewhat like the tide. The tide actually will sweep in. Of course, the tide affects, you know, protected inner harbors and that sort of thing. That's because the tide is an even longer period wave, and it can penetrate into all these areas. So it's actually, if you're in the position of being in a vessel and trying to escape a tsunami, certainly going ashore and going to high ground is your best option. But if you have to do it on the water, going to what you think of as protected water is not a good strategy. That's often worse because you're going into shallow water where the wave might break, generate stronger currents. Where you really want to be headed is out into the biggest open, most open and deepest water you can find. But anyway, I don't know if Elena or Dimitri wants to take that too.
So the question was how fast they propagate and what else?
So there was one question about you know, the propagation of a tsunami from Kodiak to Seldovia, and then another question about the protection that, you know, whether we're protected by the fact that the tsunami has to go around Horn.
No, you're right. Yeah, I mean, we always get those questions from the community members. For example, let's say, and you know, Alaska, if you look at the Alaska coast, you will find twins or, you know, twins of bays and harbors pretty much everywhere. I mean, you look at the bay and you say, oh, this bay looks exactly like that bay. And quite often you have a narrow bay, and at the entrance to that bay, you have an island. And people think, oh, this island will protect us from tsunamis. No, it's not going to protect you, because as you were right, it's a very long wave, and this island is not a kind of something that is going to protect. The wave just kind of goes. Sometimes it doesn't even notice the island because the wavelength is so high. I mean, the wave is so long. So. And also because it's not just the surface wave, it's the whole depth of the ocean that moves. I have that little, I think I've shown it already, but it just never hurts. So we know that if you're in the middle of the ocean, it's not going to be visible. So if you're in the middle of the Pacific, the wave is not visible. But this is what happens, like in Hawaii in 1946, when that earthquake happened in the Aleutians. And 5 hours later, the Gila Harbor was destroyed. So what happens is that, so this animation shows how the wave travels, and you can see that energy kind of goes all the way from the surface to the bottom. That's why, like, a little island does nothing to that kind of energy. And then what happens when they actually go to shallow water? So if in the deep ocean, the wave height can be just 1 foot, then when it enters shallow water, the wave goes up because the energy is still there, and the energy cannot just dissipate or disappear. So the energy is conserved, and the water goes, I mean, the wave goes up. So that's why I think, yes, in some cases, coastal topography does affect the waves. Sometimes it can amplify them, sometimes it can be a little bit more protective, but not in the case of Seldovia when tsunami comes from, let's say, Gulf of Alaska.
You know, I've been working a lot on this possible tsunami scenario along with Dimitri and Mike in Prince William Sound that would landslide generated tsunami. And one of the things that really stands out there is that there's quite a bit of amplification, so that tsunami gets more intense at the heads of many of the bays in Prince William Sound. And that's partly because these are fairly deep bays, and so the wave comes in, and not only does it shoal in the way that Elena was showing, but it also reflects off the head of the bay, and so it builds on top of itself at the head of the bay. And so a lot of these places that are exactly the places where people want to go anchor their boat and they want to go camp on the beach, that those are the places where we see the most distant impacts of this particular tsunami scenario.
Okay.
let's see, I was just going to pull up these questions again. Okay, I think we did a good job covering some of the resources available for finding out information on a tsunami. I think maybe we got I sort of half answered the question about deep versus shallow earthquakes. In general, the way an earthquake generates a tsunami is that it deforms the ocean floor and it pushes, right, either drops the ocean downward or pushes it up. And when the ocean isn't flat, that starts propagating as a wave. So it's that motion of the ocean floor that generates the tsunami, and it has to be a rupture that extends quite shallow to quite a shallow level for it to produce that kind of deformation. So it has to be a fairly shallow earthquake. Now, the largest earthquakes, the actual epicenter that starts the whole earthquake could be quite deep, and then that deformation could propagate to shallow. But in general, shallow earthquakes are more of a concern. And I know that there was one other little collection of questions.
But can I, and I know you're looking at the questions that were sent to you in advance.
Yeah.
I typed a question in the chat. I don't know if you guys saw that or not, but my question is, looking at the map as it stands currently, do we feel like, I'm thinking about what Elena said about the, in Japan, where everybody died in the building that was built to protect them. Looking at the map, is the school legitimately a good location for the community to be evacuating to? Or should we be looking at a secondary location? And if so, where would that secondary location be in Seldovia? I mean, obviously higher ground is the further you go out the road, but you look at the inundation zone, and Jackaloff Bay Road, is also a big part of that. So it would, it would mean you would have to get there ahead of it, way ahead of it, to be able to use Jackaloff Bay Road to access anything further out. Like we've talked a lot about 4 Mile, where the fire department location is, as a secondary shelter. So can you just speak to our shelter situation in Seldovia, being someone who knows intimately those details?
So is this school?
Yes, that's the school there, yeah.
Yes.
And that's the main evacuation center, and that's where, and people are pretty well trained to go there. There were people that were there in the recent earthquake.
How about people in this area? Do they have a separate shelter?
No, there's not a separate shelter, and that's a concern that's been raised because there's the bridge there that you have to cross in order to get to the school. And so obviously during an earthquake, it could be that the bridge would be damaged.
We're going to Shannon's house.
Yeah, because I'm on that hill.
But you're right on the line.
I know, that's the joke.
This is Dmitry, and I want to say that judging that if a specific building or a school is at risk, this is a very hard question. And there needs to be more than the map. It needs to be engineering assessment of the ground around the school, because a tsunami can also scour the ground. It can reduce. It can remove the ground in front of the school, and so the first wave can remove the ground. Maybe the second wave can make a bigger wave right next to the school. So it needs to be more thorough assessment of the structure, and to maybe do a specific study. Use a better DEM elevation model around the school, and just to pay more attention to details. We do these maps for the community approach, but not for the specific buildings yet.
There are a couple of things I can speak to that sort of on the specifics of what we're looking at here. So as far as the substrate, actually where the school is, they actually dug into a bedrock hill There is the, you know, so the be kind of the south corner of the school, maybe on fill, but most of it is actually on fairly firm substrate. And also, if you actually, for those of you who know the town, if you kind of follow that red line there, you'll note that that's down the hill from the school. So there's a significant amount of elevation in that short distance between the red line and the school. So that's the kind of thing you would want as a buffer. You know, so it's, I mean, you know, you always, in the position, you know, it's like going and asking a doctor if there could be anything wrong with your health, right? We can come up with scenarios where it would be worse, and it's really good to be very conservative when you're in an evacuation situation. However, it's also good to recognize that you know, the scenario that goes into this red line that we're looking at is a very conservative scenario. It involves somewhere, I think it's over 5 meters of subsidence, which would be geologically very unusual. There aren't really very many examples of that worldwide during earthquakes. It also shows the tsunami coming well short in terms of elevation, not so much thinking of the horizontal distance, but it comes well short in terms of elevation of the school. So from that perspective, just speaking, you know, as myself, you know, I feel like the school is in a pretty safe place. The concerns about getting across the bridge, on the other hand, that I think is significant. Bridges can be quite vulnerable to earthquakes, and there is fill involved in the foundation of the bridge. So I would be concerned that the bridge might not be drivable and might even be completely destroyed by the sort of strong shaking that might be associated with an earthquake that would produce this kind of an inundation. So having, for those of you who are on the far side of the bridge, having a backup plan is not a bad idea.
Yeah, thank you, Brett, and thank you for noting that the school is on a hard rock and on a bedrock, and also that there is a significant elevation difference between where the line stops and where the school is at. And we are here in Fairbanks. We are far away from the communities, and sometimes decisions can be only made on a local level. After visiting the site and assessing how everything is laying out in a landscape. And this is why I mentioned this engineering survey, that this is just a site-specific thing. But as you mentioned, that it's a significant elevation difference. So that's assuring that it's safer than it looks from the picture, yeah, from the flat world. And talking about the bridges, I think it's very good idea to have a secondary evacuation site. It could be very expensive, but in the case when a bridge fails, this is not a situation to be when people are trying to cross the channel and without any bridge on a failed bridge. And in the case of this community split apart by the bridge, it's also important to plan for the emergency management, to how to reach to the people in need of medical help on other sides of the community. And as you mentioned that the ground was rocking kind of wave motion, that what is it telling is that roads could be failing during the big earthquake. And this is also a consideration take into account if roads might not be drivable in this low-lying areas where there is lots of sediments.
You know, the state has a maintenance shop out there by the airport. I'm looking at it, that's very big. That might be a secondary location for.
Is it this one?
No, I think it's kind of low.
It's in the floodplain.
It doesn't look like it there.
It is in the floodplain.
We're looking at Jim's shop there.
Oh, that was Jim's shop. Okay.
Yeah, Jim's shop is kind of wouldn't be very far above it, but the hill behind it that's the largest building right in the middle there is what we're talking about. So that one is actually not very much elevation between that and the edge of inundation. However, right behind it, so right to the southeast of it, there's a lot of elevation up to this, right there, yeah. And so this area, this would be a really natural direction to go. That's a private residence there, but Jim's other shop further south there, I don't know if, you know, something like that would be, you know, those areas are really, really safe.
Yeah.
Well, I noticed in the chat there's a question about that KBBI had referred to a 50-foot inundation. Do you know what that was in reference to?
I did not hear about this from the recent one, but I did hear about, like, I think that, so the KBBI is the local public radio station. And as I recall, during the Anchorage earthquake about 2 years ago, there was a report, and I didn't hear either of these directly, but I heard them from, you know, people mentioned that someone had reported on KBBI that there was a 60-foot wave expected or something like that. And it led to some significant panic. And I think that this maybe interfaces also with the sort of information that goes around on social media. I think there's a real challenge, you know, in for whatever reason, yeah, you get a lot of kind of faulty information that spreads very quickly during those minutes to hours after a strong earthquake. And I don't know, does the state, is there an agency, I guess, analysis and study of that and an examination of how to kind of mitigate that issue to some extent?
You mean how to prevent people getting false information from social media?
You're not going to be able to prevent it, but, you know, something that I think that it's something that, you know, bears, you know, that would be useful to directly study, like how does that information spread and how can that spread be reduced? I mean, this is a problem, of course, in a lot of fields right now, is that misinformation spreads very, very quickly. And I think there's a considerable, you know, academic, you know, sort of attempt to understand that and to deal with that, but I don't know much about it myself.
Right. I also observed people doing a really good thing of when you read something that didn't make sense, you would just say, please cite your source. You know, this was a situation where we had time to engage on social media. Obviously, in an emergency, the goal is just get yourself to high ground and be safe. But in this one, where people were engaging, we did see people, you know, kind of say, what's your source? I think the Brett Hickman Facebook page, you know, the Tsunami guy page maybe someday would be a great thing to have, you know, but you know, people kind of keeping each other accountable was helpful. What happens in Homer that they specifically announced that if you are below the 50-foot inundation zone, please go to high ground above Pioneer Boulevard. The fact is that Pioneer is way beyond the 50-foot mark, but they're basically confusing everybody because everybody basically thinks if you're south of Pioneer, you need to evacuate up.
Brett,
So
there's
does that
another-
mean
Right, I see, and I can see why they might say that, right? You know, because that gives two, you know, like, okay, 50 feet, but people don't know what 50 feet here because that's safe. But then if people go the other direction, they're like, oh, wait a second, is Pioneer at 50 feet and there's going to be a tsunami reaching Pioneer, then that totally changes the narrative in their heads. So I could see that being a difficult situation.
Yeah, so is that 50 feet in elevation or is it 50 feet from the water's edge?
I think it would be elevation in this case.
This is a good question. So, and this 50-foot line, this is a old issue. And before the computers, people were trying to make safe evacuation lines. And it was the rule of thumb that all communities not which were thought to be moderate to low threat hazard should evacuate a 50-foot line. Every community which had a high or very high tsunami threat should go to 100-foot line. So this is how this 100-foot and 50-foot lines invented, and this is how they still alive today. And this is really difficult to tell what is a 50-foot line. Is it measured from low water? Is it measured from the high water? We know in some communities that the tidal range is already 10 feet. And if someone is saying 50 feet, and then it's some margin of error, how to measure it? And we try to do this maps, which put the line on the streets, and so an evacuation zone, if it aligns with a street network, can be really helpful. If all people below a certain street, in case of a tsunami, should go beyond this street to some evacuation shelter.
Brett, I'd like to say one more thing. This is Darlene. And from Jackaloff Bay Road to the airport, there is an easement that has really been moved around over the years, and people have built houses and where the easement is and all that. But I've always thought that with the bridge being, could be in trouble from earthquakes or some other natural disaster, that there really should be a way for people on the east side or the east addition to get out to Jackaloff Bay Road, and even people coming into Jackaloff from Jackaloff Bay if they need to get to the airport in a hurry. If that easement was put in and a road put from the airport to Jackaloff Bay on that easement, that would be a safety factor, I would think.
Where is that road? Where is the Jackaloff Bay?
So what she's talking about is if you go just a little bit north, Elena, zoom out some and go a little bit north, and so there's this lagoon that's just north of the airport, and the main road goes along the west side of the lagoon, and so the question is about potentially building a road that goes along the east side.
Oh, so this is the Jackaloff Bay, right?
Yeah, that's the Jackaloff Bay Road, right?
Okay.
And it's a question of,
to go like this way?
More. Yeah.
Okay.
And there's a private drive back there that covers a lot of that distance, but then there's a little stream, and I mean it definitely would. I think the vulnerability of the bridge to earthquake or to tsunami damage too. I think it's really it's something worth continuing to bring that up and looking for a way to improve the connectivity. And I think you're right, Darlene. That would be a nice way to do it. The land ownership situation might be complex. I don't know.
At one point, there was a straight easement that went through, and then when it got subdivided, she had the easement moved down to the bottom. But there is a legal easement that should take a person from Jackaloff Bay Road over to the airport. The problem would be creating a road for the public.
And I think it was written into that recent roads draft, that plan we did this winter, right?
I've brought it up for years, about 20 or 30 years, but something that should be done eventually.
Yeah, there is a very similar situation in Seward. Let me show you, like it's so convenient now. We can have pretty much everything here. So look at this. So this is Seward. And this is exactly the same thing. So this highway, it's the only road that connects Seward to outside, right? This highway will be flooded. It was flooded in '64, and in '64, the community was cut off from the outside. And so when we pointed to that at the community meeting, they realized that there is a dirt road that goes here around. And they can use that road as an emergency road. It's like at this point, it's a four-wheeler. I think, I'm not used to looking at Seward and this kind of. Let's see if we can change the. No, we cannot, okay. Yeah, so it goes like that. It goes uphill and it's a dirt road for four-wheelers, but it can be used in case of emergency if the highway is destroyed here. So.
I mean, this kind of speaks to the broad question of like, what do you do as a community, you know, to mitigate risk, and of course, education is an important piece of that. But there are infrastructure things you can do, and improving connectivity. You know, you might be having a conversation about earthquakes and tsunamis, and that lead to that. But then, you know, the issue that actually is raised down the road has to do with something else, but that improved connectivity may well still serve you well. I think it's a pretty valuable direction to go. Just like it's good to, you know, think about having really well-sited evacuation centers that are well equipped, and you know, we don't know what the future brings, and we don't know how precisely we've modeled one scenario or another, but some of these resources, you know, could well really pay off down the road. I mean, maybe we're talking about forest fire, you know, or something like that. It could certainly could be something where connectivity was really important.
Mm-hmm.
With that, we have a chat message in here that talks about that many people don't have access to social media and the internet, and only the alert siren and direction to listen to the radio. The radio says evacuate, and they can't hang out on Facebook, which Dimitri said that if you do feel the shaking and the siren blast, you know, don't hang out on social media, but to evacuate. I do know that there is the NOAA radio that is also available, and if you don't have one of those NOAA radios, especially one that you can either battery operated or wind up, we do have those in our preparedness buckets that we've been giving out. So if you don't have those, you know, a 10-3 ready set goes, and you can get one. But with the NOAA radio, they do give tsunami warnings, and for our area, the radio frequency is 162.550, and it would be either channel 5 or 6, depending on the radio manufacturer. So that's another way that you can maintain connectivity with the area to find out for evacuations.
I thought I would just look and see if I knew of any other questions from earlier. These ones we've covered. Here we are. Let's see, let me just skim these real quick here. So there's this question about, I don't think we've really properly answered the question about, and I think this relates to the recent tsunami warning, the time that a wave takes to get from Kodiak to Seldovia. You know, in the case of this this earthquake near the Shumagan Islands that happened whatever, a week and a half ago, it was traveling, and it would, you know, if the tsunami that was generated, and there was a tsunami generated, it just wasn't very big, was traveling past Kodiak on its way towards Kachemak Bay. And so in that case, one could look to the tide gauges, there are a couple of them on Kodiak, and get some forewarning of what's happening in Seldovia. But one thing I'd note is if the sort of more dangerous scenario here is a tsunami that's generated much closer, it might be coming from out in the Gulf of Alaska, and so it's not going to be that as long a period between when it probably will arrive in Kodiak before it gets to Seldovia, but maybe not much before. It could even be something that's generated related to a local fault in the mouth of Cook Inlet or something like that, or to a subduction zone earthquake that is deforming the whole area. And so there are at least, you know, initial waves that are coming well before that. So it isn't a general, it's not, it applies, I think, in the case of the recent earthquake, that we could be looking at the Kodiak tide gauge in order to see what might be coming. But that's not a general state of affairs. Like you could have a tsunami that would not register in Kodiak, but would be dangerous in Seldovia, or would register in Seldovia before it made it to Kodiak. So there are a lot of scenarios there. I don't know if you want to add anything, anyone else?
No, I agree. Like, for example, this one probably will get to Seldovia either before or at the same time as it gets to Kodiak. And also scenarios like in Prince William Sound probably can come to Seldovia pretty quickly.
Do you guys model I remember, do you model a border ranges fault event? Is that?
Yes, I did. It was in the very first report for Homer and Seldovia. Yeah, but back then, this 1964 was still the worst case. So we had border ranges and we had 1964. And 1964, of course, was worse than border ranges fault. But now we know that sometimes, you know, what was the worst case 20 years ago is not the worst case anymore. So we need to look at other things in the Gulf of Alaska that can make potentially dangerous tsunamis, and much, much closer to Seldovia.
And what about volcano sources, Augustine, or, I mean, I know Jim Baget has suggested even like major flank collapse from redoubt or something may have generated tsunamis in the past. I'm not sure I totally buy that, but what is your take on the potential for you know, volcanic landslides generating tsunamis that would impact Seldovia?
So I've studied all them. You mean from Augustine, right?
Augustine especially, but you
yeah,
know, conceivably you could have a landslide, you know, a large landslide coming from one of the other volcanoes and making it to the ocean.
So what I did, I modeled all these potential landslides from Augustine. The only problem is that we cannot put a number to the volume of that landslide. And also which particular slope will collapse, because it's a big difference. If it's western slope collapses, it's one story. If it's eastern, it's a different story. Like it happened in 1883 with Augustine. So in 1883, there was a north flank that went into the water. So what I did, I modeled the collapse on the eastern flank of the volcano. And yeah, it's all in the report. So you can look at the wave heights. But again, it's so hard to trust those scenarios in terms of the certain wave height, because there are so many uncertainties, many more than in the earthquake, I think. Because everything depends on the volume, everything depends on the slope at which it enters water, and also the bathymetry around the island. So if it enters extremely shallow water, it cannot displace much water in that area.
So if you were, you know, someone held your hand to the fire and said, okay, you have to give us some answer. Should we be worried about Augustine tsunami?
Yeah, I mean, if there is an eruption, then yes, you need to be ready to evacuate.
Okay.
Hey, this is James. I'm sorry, I have to hop off if I have a personal commitment that I have to get to, but just wanted to say this was really informative, and thank you all so much for inviting me to this. And I will follow up with Dimitri next week, and have a great rest of the meeting, everyone.
Thanks, James.
Thank you for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you, James.
All right, y'all have a great weekend. Thank you.
So I'm looking at these other questions. There's one question at the end here that just, we've sort of danced around this in various ways, but I don't know if there are any other comments that anyone has. We have found communication to be lacking to poor. Is there a plan in place for improvement, or is this left up to the individual communities?
I can answer that one. I'll take a stab at that. So I have been working on a project for quite some time to see about getting additional cell service in Seldovia, even if it's just from temporary, it's called a communication on wheels, where it's a mobile cell tower that comes in. Just this last week, I was talking with AT&T, FirstNet, T-Mobile, and Verizon to see what kind of options we have. So again, I'm looking, and I use this this incident with the tsunami as more fuel to light a fire, because my understanding was there were people evacuated to the high school, and then they didn't have cell service to get the all clear. And to me, as for a life safety issue, that's totally unacceptable. So like I said, I've been working on this. Actually, we put this into the tribe's mitigation plan last year. So it's something that we have identified for some time, and we're currently actively working on to resolve.
Is there anything else on the communications end from the state perspective, or the is there anything else you want to add in there?
Communication is also the venue for the warning center and the weather forecast officers, and they should be looped into this communication issues. NOAA is issuing those communications at the first.
Yeah, I thought of it a little too late, but it would have been nice to have Dave Snyder on this call to provide his take with the National Tsunami Warning Center. Okay, I think those are the questions that I'm aware of, and I've been watching the conversation going on here. I think there's good conversation going on in the chat, but not further questions there. Is there anyone else who wants to bring up some questions?
Any other questions here? We've answered our questions, all of you.
More at some
Thank you for doing this.
I just wanted to ask Mike if you want to talk a little bit about that brochure project.
I certainly can. We are right now doing some initial brochures for a couple of communities in Alaska, something of a prototype, to be honest. But the idea is to take the key information and links and distill them to kind of a one-page format that can be readily distributed. And if this is successful, and if Soldovia is interested, it would certainly seem a good next community to work with.
Be great, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I hope we will, after we make those so our pilot communities are Valdez and Unalaska. So after we establish that kind of framework for making those brochures, we will talk to you again and see what kind of information you want to have on those. And then I hope it will be the beginning of developing the tsunami hazard mitigation plan, the evacuation zones, the assembly points, shelters, and kind of to start thinking about that and distribute to tourists and to citizens. So that people actually have this thing at home, you know, in school, everywhere. They can look at it, and it will be kind of not the social media stuff that's not necessarily true. So it will be hopefully a solid piece of information for people. So.
Educational tool, that sounds
Exactly,
wonderful.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
That'll sound very useful.
And here, can I point at this map again? Where is that? So here, there is that little plus, right? And if you click on information button, you get to the information page about how we make the map, and also frequently asked questions. What's the inundation line? Will all tsunamis flood all the inundation zones? So it's nice kind of digest of actually what we've been talking today. And also there are good resources where to find information about tsunamis. like different agencies that have reliable information about tsunamis, scientifically, checked. So
This is the tsunami.alaska.edu site.
exactly, tsunami.alaska.edu.
Great.
So this is that little tab. We have news and projects, and it describes, how did it happen? Okay. Yeah, so it just shows what we're working on, and there is a list of communities that has a tsunami study done, for example, published reports. Why it's not? For example, again, you click on, no, it's, oh, I'm sorry, these are pedestrian travel time maps. Let me look again. Inundation mapping project here. We have published reports in different areas of Alaska, and yeah, so it's something to look at.
Okay.
Yeah, this is fun page with all the animation. You can look at, for example, the how the wave is made by subduction zone earthquake and stuff like that for children, or maybe not for children.
Yeah, Elena mentioned that that she and Barrett has been in the community a number of times, and if there is another time that you would like us to present to the school children, it's probably the best way to educate the younger generation, is that would be happy to ask Noah for funding, and then you can come.
Alex.
Any other questions?
Goodbye.
I think maybe we're about done here, huh?
Well, thank you so much, and this was so informative and enjoyable, and thank you for being on Zoom with us, and it's like having you in our living room.
Yes, thank you.
It was really enjoyable. Thank you, and have a good night. Thank you
I
all.
want to give a quick pitch. The Ready, Set, Go on Thursday, August 20th. Be personalizing your Go kit, and hopefully, if everything stays the way it is now, I will actually be in Soldovia to present that in person, and I'm looking forward to that.
Wonderful. Yeah, very good. And I don't know, are we going to demonstrate what's in there, or just wait for later in August?
We can wait for later in August. We will let folks know that if they attend 3 times, they will get an emergency preparedness kit. They're a 2-person kit, and what the presentations in August will be on is how you can update that kit and personalize it for your own home.
Yes, very good. Yeah. So see you August 20th. August 20th at 5 o'clock.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Michael, for organizing that. Yeah.